Hey y'all, welcome back to the channel. Sorry I've been gone for so long. It's been about a week and a half since I posted anything, and that's because I've been really sick. I was tested for COVID and it was negative, so I don't know if it was COVID, but I just know the last week and a half I've been very sick and I really haven't been on social media very much at all. So I apologize for my absence, but I'm back. I'm on the mend. I can't say I'm 100% recovered from whatever was wrong, but I'm definitely feeling a lot better. So I apologize for any nasaliness. I know my Kentucky accent is a bit much at times, so putting the nasal on top of it might be a bit hilarious, but I do apologize. And hopefully in a few days that will go away too. But we had started our series on anxiety, and I didn't want to just leave you guys hanging, and I was feeling up to it, so I thought we'd dive in and do a quick video today. Last week, or I guess maybe it was even the week before last, we talked about generalized anxiety disorder as a type of anxiety disorder. Today, I'm going to talk about social anxiety disorder. This is something that I'm seeing a lot more in my practice. It's actually quite common. It's a quite common disorder among the pantheon of anxiety disorders. It's one of the more common ones. Now, it's also one that's sometimes misdiagnosed, and when I say that, I sort of mean self-diagnosis, which we all do. But, I have a lot of people that might come in and say they have social anxiety, but once we dig down a little deeper, it may actually be something else that's going on. So it's also, kind of something that people gravitate towards as sort of a self-diagnosis. But let's talk about the true symptoms of social anxiety disorder. And let me just say this. The name of this disorder has actually been updated in recent years. Actually, today, among the psychiatric and psychologists and therapists, my community, we refer to this now as social phobia. So if you hear the term social phobia, that also refers to social anxiety disorder. And I think most people still refer to it sort of in lay terms as social anxiety disorder, and that's probably the term that you're most familiar with. But going forward, we might hear the term social phobia more and more. Okay, so what are some of the symptoms of social anxiety disorder? How do you know if you've got it? One of the key features of this disorder obviously is an intense fear of social situations. People with this disorder tend to avoid social situations. You would tend to not want to be around not only a big group of people necessarily, but also people that you don't know very well. That's something that I hear over and over. A lot of times people with these symptoms and with this disorder will say, well, I do okay around people that I know, but not so much around people that I don't know. So there's an intense fear and level of anxiety around social situations. Meeting new people can trigger, lots of anxiety when you have this disorder. One of the significant key features of this disorder, and I see this complaint over and over again, is a fear of embarrassing yourself, a fear of humiliating yourself in front of other people, or of being embarrassed or humiliated. There's often an intense feeling that others are judging you, or that they are going to judge you, and that they are going to judge you and evaluate you negatively in some way. So that sort of all ties in together with, being embarrassed, being humiliated, feeling like people are going to judge you and evaluate you. The other thing that's quite common with this is an intense fear or feeling that others are going to notice your anxiety, that others are going to see your distress, that they're going to know that you're anxious, that you're fearful, that you're nervous. That's oftentimes a feature of this as well. There's could be physical symptoms, sweating, blushing, shaking, difficulty, speaking, maybe having a trembling voice or something like that. So there's a whole host of symptoms that go along with this disorder, but a lot of it really centers around, really features this feeling that other people really are going to pay a lot of undue attention to you, that they're going to be observing you, that they're going to be judging you, that maybe they'll know you're anxious and that they're going to think poorly of you or evaluate you negatively or think that you're weird or think that you're awkward or things like that. I hear people say that a lot. I don't want people to think I'm weird. So those are some of the typical symptoms. Oftentimes when people do have to be in social situations with this disorder, it's very unpleasant, right? Obviously, it's very unpleasant. And then afterwards, they will spend, ridiculous amounts of time analyzing everything that happened in that social situation. Okay, so this is kind of a common feature too for people who suffer with this. Excuse me, my camera went a little wonky there. Sometimes I get a little animated and my setup goes a little bit askew. But no. So people who have this disorder, it's very common that once they, have to be in a social situation, after the social situation is over, then they spend a lot of time going back through it with a microscope, analyzing every interaction, every look, everything they said, everything that they did, and agonizing over it. And oftentimes feeling like they did or said things that were embarrassing or that were weird or that were awkward. And that's another thing too, that a feeling of awkwardness. That's something that I also hear people say a lot is, I just feel very awkward. I feel very self-conscious in social situations. And that's another thing. I should have said that a little bit more on the front end. A lot of times for people who have this disorder, when they are in social situations, it's almost as though they are hyper aware of themselves. Like they are so self-conscious, they're hyper aware of their body movements, of their location in the room. They're hyper aware of their voice, of the volume of their voice, of how it sounds. So they're very hyper aware of themselves and very self-conscious. So then they spend a lot of time in retrospect looking back on all of that. And I've seen this disorder in a little bit of everybody. I've seen it in kids. I've seen it in adults of all ages. I've seen it in all races and all, walks of life. So it's spread out pretty, broadly across the population. And what's interesting about this disorder is it's a little ambiguous as to what may be the cause, like the initial cause or trigger to this. It could be a wide variety of things. Sometimes it could be attributed to a really bad experience, some type of social experience that caused a great embarrassment or humiliation. Somebody, especially at a young age, might have been embarrassed publicly in some sort of way, and then this fear sort of takes root. But it could be a lot of different things. And something that's really interesting, I was actually reading an article earlier about this, and some, theorists and studies think that this social anxiety disorder could actually sort of run through families, that it can be seen generationally throughout families, which is interesting. And then it that begs the question, okay, so is it genetic? Is there some sort of hereditary gene that's causing that to be the case, or is it environmental? Is it a learned fear, so to speak? Is it a learned anxiety? Is it one generation observing this fear in the older generation and then sort of picking up that trait too? And I don't know. It's interesting to think about. That sort of thing kind of fascinates me, that nature versus nurture. My personal belief, as with a lot of things when it comes to mental health, I think it's usually a mix. I definitely think there are some genetic components to mental health and behavioral health issues, but wholeheartedly there are a lot of environmental causes of mental disorders and psychological disorders. So I think it's probably a mix of both, but that is sort of an interesting phenomenon, that something like a social anxiety disorder, that you would see it flowing through families. And I will say this, I've told you guys all along that I'm going to keep this very personal and be real open and honest with you guys. Social anxiety disorder is something that I have found myself struggling with in recent years. It's not something that I've always had, or at least I don't think so. In fact, when I was younger, I used to kind of think I was a bit of a social person and a social butterfly. But I've kind of noticed, maybe in the last 10 years or so, that I have been experiencing some of these symptoms. And it's so funny because you think, doing what I do, I mean, my profession, my calling, my career, part of it is to diagnose, things like this in other people. So you'd think whenever I start to show symptoms of a problem that I would instantly recognize it. No, that's probably the opposite. It's like it takes forever for me to realize that something's going on with me. So, in the last few years, I've kind of realized that probably maybe the last 10 years, I've been experiencing some level of social anxiety disorder. So this is one of those anxiety disorders. Remember, I told you guys at the outset that there were a couple that I suffer from, and that I would talk about that. This is one of them. And this is something that, like I said, is fairly recent, maybe in the last, 10 years or less. And I don't know, in my case, I don't know if it's totally environmental. I mean, I don't feel like there's anything in particular that happened 10 years ago that suddenly triggered this. So it's kind of a weird thing for me. Could it be genetic? Absolutely. I have a very strong and pervasive family history of mental illness and psychological disorders. And on one side of my family, genetically, that is primarily anxiety type disorders. And there absolutely have been other members of my family at older generational levels who I can, knowing this like I do now, I can safely say they had social anxiety disorder. So it could absolutely be genetic. I think it's interesting that it didn't manifest in me until I was, 30-ish. But, sometimes genes flip on and off at different times in our lives. So who knows? I don't know why I have it. I don't know why it suddenly showed up about 10 years ago, but it's a doozy. It's really rough, and even though I'm a therapist and I know logically all the ways, to deal with these kinds of things, it's still difficult when you're going through it. It's an irrational kind of thing. I mean, you get in these social situations and you have, I mean, I will describe them as irrational fears. I'm talking about myself and what I have gone through with it. It's just very difficult. And a lot of times with this disorder, there will be certain things in particular that make a person very nervous and anxious. Like, obviously, if you have to speak, of course, a lot of people have a fear of speaking. For somebody with social anxiety disorder, this is multiplied, probably times 10, but it could be other things. One common feature of this, there's a sort of a subset of people with this disorder who have a lot of fear and anxiety about eating and drinking in public, like eating and drinking in front of other people. It could be, having to walk across a room. That might be a big trigger for some people that have this disorder. So it can be a little bit different for everybody. For me, I don't mind being in a big group of people. I do not like it when all the attention is on me. And the weird thing about having to speak is if I have to stand up and speak to a group, even if it's like a group of like less than 10 people, I can't do it. I just can't do it. But if we're all seated, like if we were all seated around a big conference table or something like that, a dozen people or whatever, if we're all seated and we're all at the same level, it's a little bit easier for me. It's still a little bit nerve-wracking, but it's a little bit easier. So there's sort of different levels depending on, the things that I have to do. Sometimes I get a little bit nervous about eating and drinking in front of people, and it goes back to that fear of being judged or evaluated. And it's not even, a lot of people would look at me and say, oh yeah, it's because she's overweight and she thinks people are going to judge her because she's fat and she's eating. No, it's not that. I don't care about being fat and eating. That's no big deal. For me, the eating and drinking is more, I have this irrational fear that I'm going to do something weird, like I'm going to eat weirdly, or I'm going to chew loudly, or I'm going to get strangled on my water or something and have to cough it up. It's very bizarre, but it's a fear. It's a disorder. It's a mental disorder, and sometimes it's uncontrollable. And the big thing about these disorders is, and what makes them a disorder, is the fact that they cause dysfunction. They cause you to alter the way you live your life, and this has been very true for me. I always, in the back of my mind, am thinking about this kind of stuff whenever something comes up in my day-to-day life about having to be in a social situation. If I'm invited somewhere, if my spouse says, oh, let's go do this or let's go do that, I always, in the back of my mind, kind of think, okay, what's the social situation going to be like? How many people are going to be there? How am I going to have to interact? It's just a whole situation. So when you have this, it's hard to just kind of live your life on the fly and go with the flow, because you're always kind of thinking in the back of your mind, okay, is there a way to avoid this? And a lot of people will flat out avoid it. I know a lot of people with this disorder who just stay home. They don't go anywhere. They don't do anything. They've allowed it to sort of totally impair their life. And I say maybe they don't know any different way to do it. Now, I can't do that. I'm a busy person. I have my own business. I'm married. I've got, family. I've got tons of nieces and nephews that, I'm involved in their lives. I have a few friends. My circle's kind of small there, but I can't just, even though we've been quarantined and we are kind of stuck at home, but I can't just withdraw into my shell. I have to push myself out into some of these social situations, and it's agonizing sometimes, but you know what? I'm working on it. And I guess that's the bottom line in all of this, and that's what I really want to say to you. First of all, if I can suffer from this and struggle with it, as a therapist myself and sort of an expert, I hate to say expert, but sort of an expert in mental health, anybody can suffer from this, and there's no shame in it. It's a problem, and you can learn to deal with it and to live with it. So if you are experiencing any of these symptoms, and you feel like you might have this disorder or something like it, go see a therapist. Go see somebody like me. Let them diagnose you. They will properly diagnose you, and then you can go from there. Now, the treatment for a disorder like this, medication can be helpful, because this is the kind of disorder that's primarily only triggered in certain specific situations, social situations, right? I have a lot of clients who have this disorder, and they have a prescription for medication to take as needed to help them in situations. So for example, if they know they are going somewhere where they're going to be in a crowd of people, or they're going somewhere, that's going to be triggering. And let me tell you, if you have this disorder, you're an expert on what triggers it, okay? So if you know you're going to be in one of those situations, I have a lot of clients who have a prescription for something to take before they go or when they get there, to help relax them and calm them down a little bit. Now, for some people that might be a stronger medication, like, Valium or Xanax or something like that. I always caution people, be very careful with that class of medication, because it's strong medicine, and it can be addictive, and it can be habit forming. But sometimes people need it. Sometimes people legitimately need it. But there are also a couple of other types of medications that can be used, strategically in situations like this that are a little safer. They're not necessarily addictive or habit forming and not so easily abused as some of those other medications. So, one option to treat this is definitely medication. And I have a medication. I take a medication called hydroxyzine. It's a mild, sort of light, I want to say sedative. It will make you a little bit drowsy at times, but it relaxes you. So if I know I'm going to be in an extremely, anxious, social kind of situation, I might take one, or I might take two before I go. And there's no shame in needing medication. But also, if you have this disorder, going to see a therapist is very beneficial because they can help you talk through it. They can kind of help you analyze it. They can help you figure out some coping skills, some coping strategies, because even if you go the medication route or not, some people choose they do not want to do medication. And if you don't, then you're going to need some other coping skills and coping strategies to deal with this, especially, if you're going to be out in social situations, which they're hard to avoid 100%. Okay, so I would definitely recommend and encourage you to go and see a therapist, get diagnosed, and then go from there. Let them work with you on figuring out what the best course of treatment is going to be for you. And I want to just throw this in here at the end. A lot of people, when we talk about social anxiety disorder, a lot of people mention agoraphobia. Agoraphobia is a very specific type of phobia. Now, I said the social anxiety disorder is now considered social phobia. Agoraphobia is a different phobia, basically. A lot of people kind of get the two mixed up, and some people sort of use them interchangeably, social anxiety disorder and agoraphobia. They're not the same thing. Agoraphobia is its own thing. It's its own phobia. So just real quickly, some of the symptoms of agoraphobia, intense fear of leaving the home, fear of crowds, waiting in line, enclosed spaces, elevators, small stores, movie theaters, open spaces, right? So I know that sounds like completely opposite. They could have a fear of enclosed spaces, but they might also have a fear of open spaces like bridges, parking lots, things like that, public transportation, planes, trains. Now, some of this starts to get into claustrophobia type symptoms, but that's its own thing too, so we won't even go there today. But so with agoraphobia, there are some very specific types of things that people have this intense fear and anxiety about. So it's not the same as social anxiety disorder. It's not necessarily the social situation that people with agoraphobia have anxiety about. It's the space that they're in that triggers it, if that makes sense, okay? So with social anxiety disorder, the phobia is related to your actions with other people and other people's view of you and their reactions to you, whereas with agoraphobia, the fear is related to the space that you're in, whether you're home, whether you're in a building, whether you're on a bridge, whether you're on a bus. So it is a little bit different. So just to kind of clarify, but okay, let's not go off the rails because we're getting too long here, and I've told you guys I'm going to keep it succinct. So that's all for anxiety disorders this week. Next week, I'll be back with another installment of our anxiety disorders series. I'm not sure what topic we're going to do. We might do panic disorder, possibly. So if anybody has any specific requests or any feedback, please hit me up in the comments below and I'll definitely get back to you. Give me a thumbs up. If you're not already subscribed, please subscribe if you'd like to see more content about mental health and mental disorders and wellness and all that good stuff. And I will be back in a couple of days with the second part in our love and relationship series. So if you guys are interested in that or you're following that, join us for that in a couple of days. All right. See you next time.